He bought a one-way ticket with cash. He chose the last row. He ordered a bourbon. And then he waited. He didn't fidget. He didn't draw attention. He just sat there in seat 18E with a cheap clip-on tie and a black attaché case, and a plan that no one in the history of American aviation has ever replicated. Not the crime, not the disappearance, not the silence that followed. 54 years have passed, hundreds of investigators, over 800 suspects, one clue found by a child on a riverbank, and still no name, no body, no answer. This is the story of a man the world knows as D.B. Cooper, a name that isn't even his. November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, Portland International Airport, Oregon. Airlines in 1971 were a different world. No metal detectors, no photo ID required at the counter. A man could walk up, hand over cash, and board a commercial flight with a briefcase full of secrets, and no one would think twice. That was the World 500. B. Cooper understood, and he used it perfectly. The flight was Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100. Destination, Seattle, Washington. 36 passengers, a crew of 6, a 30-minute hop up the coast. It should have been unremarkable. It should have been forgotten. Instead, it became the only unsolved case of air piracy in the entire history of commercial aviation. The man who bought his ticket under the name Dan Cooper was, by every witness account, impossible to remember. Mid-40s, dark hair, brown eyes, lean build, an olive complexion that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. He wore a dark business suit, a white shirt, a black J.C. Penney clip-on tie, a raincoat, and brown loafers. He carried a black attaché case and a brown paper bag. He spoke quietly. He tipped. He smoked. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner would later spend years trying to describe his face to the FBI, trying to capture something in him, some flicker of menace or madness that might explain what came next. But there was nothing. He was calm, almost bored, as if what he was about to do was simply another item on the day's agenda. When he passed Schaffner a note shortly after takeoff, she barely glanced at it. She thought it was a phone number, a man flirting on a plane. She tucked it away. He leaned over and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note." The note read, "I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner sat. He opened the case, and she saw it. Wires, red cylinders, a large cylindrical battery. Whatever it was, real or not, it was convincing enough to change the course of what happened next. She wrote down his demands and walked them to the cockpit. $200,000 in used, non-sequential $20 bills. 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve. A fuel truck standing by in Seattle. Captain William A. Scott relayed the demands to Northwest Orient headquarters in Minneapolis. The FBI was notified, and here is what is perhaps the most extraordinary detail of the entire case. They complied. Every demand was met. The plane circled Seattle for nearly 2 hours while agents photographed every single serial number on 10,000 $20 bills. The passengers were released on the tarmac. The money and parachutes were loaded, and at approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 lifted off again, headed for Mexico City with Cooper, 5 crew members, and $200,000 in a canvas bag. He had told the crew to fly at minimum airspeed, 150 knots. Maximum altitude, 10,000 feet. Landing gear down, flaps partially extended. These were not random demands. He knew exactly what those conditions meant for a Boeing 727. At around 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the black forests of southwest Washington. The crew felt a pressure change in the cabin. They checked later. The aft air stair, a retractable staircase at the rear of the 727, a feature almost unique to that aircraft, had been deployed. In flight, Cooper was gone. The FBI launched what they called NORJIC, Northwest Hijacking. It would become one of the longest, most exhaustive cold case investigations in American history. Agents pulled every thread. They combed seat 18E. They collected 8 cigarette butts. They recovered the clip-on tie Cooper had removed before jumping. He had left behind his note, his tie, his fingerprints, but nothing that pointed to a name. No manifest, no ID, no photograph. The name Dan Cooper was a fiction. Ground teams scoured Cowlitz and Clark counties for weeks. Army helicopters swept the suspected drop zone near Orient, Washington. They found nothing. Not a boot print. Not a parachute fragment. Not a dollar bill. Over the next 5 years, the FBI vetted over 800 suspects. Nearly everyone was eliminated. What they could establish about Cooper was a profile, not a person. He had some knowledge of the 727's mechanical systems. He understood Pacific Northwest terrain. He had basic familiarity with parachuting, but he wasn't a professional. He chose a non-steerable military parachute, the worst possible chute for a controlled landing in dense forest. And critically, he failed to notice that one of his 2 reserve parachutes had been sewn shut. A training dummy, useless. That detail nagged investigators for years. A professional would have caught it immediately. Cooper didn't, which either means he was an amateur with a very specific industrial knowledge base, or someone who didn't expect to need a backup. Then, 5 months after the hijacking, something happened that shook the investigation wide open. April 7, 1972. An Army veteran and experienced skydiver named Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. hijacked a United Airlines 727 on the Newark to Los Angeles route. He demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He ordered the plane to specific altitude and airspeed conditions. He exited through the rear air stair. The resemblance to Cooper's method was not just similar, it was almost a carbon copy. McCoy was captured days later. The FBI immediately looked hard at him for Cooper's crime. He was young, skilled, and methodical, but witnesses described Cooper as a man in his mid-40s with brown eyes, and McCoy, at 29, with blue eyes, didn't fit the physical description cleanly enough to hold. He was sentenced to 45 years. He escaped prison in 1974 and was killed in a shootout with FBI agents that same year. The case went cold. Years passed. The Pacific Northwest kept its silence. And then, on the morning of February 10, 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram changed everything. Brian was camping with his family at a place called Tenabar on the Washington side of the Columbia River. He was smoothing sand to build a campfire. His fingers hit something stiff beneath the surface. 3 deteriorating packets of $20 bills. Rubber bands still holding them together. The serial numbers matched exactly. 2 packets of 100 bills, one of 90. Arranged in the precise original order that the FBI had assembled them 9 years earlier. It was the first physical evidence recovered since the night Cooper jumped, but the location made no sense. The FBI's flight path models placed Cooper's jump zone near Orient, Washington, in the Washougal River watershed. Tenabar was roughly 20 miles in the wrong direction. Either the FBI's calculations were wrong, or Cooper had moved. Later sediment analysis delivered a genuinely disturbing possibility. The bills showed signs that they had not been continuously submerged since 1971. They appeared to have been buried on land first, then exposed to water much later. If that analysis is correct, it means Cooper survived the jump. He made it to the ground. He handled the money. He buried some of it. And then he walked away. In 2009, the investigation took another extraordinary turn. The FBI allowed a team of researchers, led by scientist Tom Kay, to examine Cooper's tie under an electron microscope. What they found embedded in the fabric was almost unbelievable. Over 100,000 microscopic particles, titanium, bismuth, strontium sulfide, cerium, antimony, rare industrial compounds that had almost no civilian applications in 1971. The titanium alone, unalloyed, pure, pointed to someone who had worked directly in aerospace or industrial manufacturing, a factory floor, a Boeing contractor facility, someone who spent years around aircraft-grade metals and walked out one day still carrying traces of that world on his clothing. The cheap clip-on tie suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. It wasn't careless dressing. It was the uniform of a man who worked around machinery where a dangling tie could get you killed. Cooper didn't just know the plane. He may have helped build planes like it. On July 8, 2016, after 45 years, the FBI formally suspended the Nordic investigation. The agency stated, plainly, that its resources were needed elsewhere. The case remained technically open, but the world's greatest manhunt for a single unnamed man was, for all practical purposes, over. No arrest, no body, no name, $194,000 still unaccounted for. Not a single bill ever surfacing in circulation across 5 decades. Then, in 2023, something unexpected happened. Richard Floyd McCoy's children, his daughter Chaundi, his son Richard III, came forward after their mother's death. Hidden in a storage shed on their North Carolina property, a parachute rig and harness. Aviation investigators examined it and described the modifications as extraordinarily rare, 1 in a billion, one of them said, possibly matching the parachutes given to Cooper in Seattle that night. They also found a skydiving logbook, entries placing their father near the relevant locations. DNA testing against the profiles extracted from Cooper's tie is still ongoing. What do we know after all of it? We know a man boarded a plane with a bomb, real or not, and the FBI and an entire airline gave him exactly what he asked for. We know he stepped off the back of a moving aircraft into a freezing Pacific Northwest storm at night, over a forest so dense that searchers came back empty-handed for years. We know a child found a fraction of the money on a riverbank, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in a condition that suggests it was once handled by human hands. We know that whoever he was calm. He was prepared. He had a grudge. He said so himself. Not against the airline. Just a grudge. Against what? Against whom? Against a world that had, perhaps, already taken something from him? Some investigators believe he died that night, his body dissolved into the deep wilderness of southwest Washington, never found, as lost as the money. Others believe he walked out of those woods, dried off, and lived the rest of his life among ordinary people, buying groceries, watching the news, listening as the FBI named him the most wanted phantom in American aviation history, and feeling, perhaps, something close to satisfaction. No one was killed. No one was physically harmed. The airline was insured. The money was never spent. So what was it for? That question has haunted every person who has ever touched this case. The investigators who spent careers on it. The amateur sleuth still running calculations today. The crew members who felt the plane shudder when he jumped, and somewhere in the dark forests of the Pacific Northwest, or in an unmarked grave, or in the memory of a family still deciding whether to speak, the answer is waiting. It has been waiting for 54 years. D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he got it, and he took the truth with him.